January 30th, 1889. The Mayerling hunting lodge. The heir to the Austrian Empire and his 17-year-old beloved found dead. What brought them to this fatal brink? A desperate step born of despair or someone's cruel will? The mystery of their final hours continues to haunt researchers. He, Crown Prince Rudolf, torn apart by inner demons and the burden of imperial duty. She, young Baroness Mary Vetsera, blinded by love and ready to do anything for her prince. Their forbidden passion promised a fairy tale but turned into a nightmare. His hidden plan, her fatal trust, what led them into this snowy trap? Tonight we shall become unseen witnesses to the last, desperate hours of their lives. I will tell you how the drama might have unfolded on that fateful night in Mayerling. Hold your breath. The story of one of the 19th century's most stirring mysteries begins. So let us go back 2 days from that fateful January morning, to the moment when Crown Prince Rudolf's heavy carriage secretly pulled up to the Mayerling hunting lodge. With him was the 17-year-old Baroness Mary Vetsera, his young, utterly devoted mistress. The frosty air burned her flushed cheeks, and the silence after the Viennese hustle seemed magical. "Oh, Rudy, it's like a fairy tale here," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Not a soul, just us and the stars, at last." She pressed against his arm trustingly. Rudolf, shrugging off his cloak, embraced her. A faint smile played on his lips. "No one will disturb us here, my little one," he said with a hint of warmth. "Our little kingdom, at least for these few days." Entering the lodge, Mary began to look around with childlike curiosity. The furnishings were simple, even austere, as befits a hunting lodge. Rough-hewn wooden furniture, stag antlers on the walls, heavy, well-worn carpets on the floor. But this did not bother Mary in the slightest. On the contrary, in this simplicity she saw a special romance, a challenge to the brilliant but oh-so-false world they had left behind. She flitted about the room like a butterfly, trying to create a sense of coziness, arranging flowers in a vase, plumping up cushions, humming a little tune. For her, this day was the embodiment of a dream. They were finally free from the Viennese court, from aversive glances, from whispers behind their backs. Early on the morning of January 29th, as planned, Count Joseph Hoyos arrived at Mayerling for the hunt. Rudolf was expecting him, for it was the Count who was to serve as a reliable cover for his departure from the vigilant court and his unloved wife. No one was to doubt that the Crown Prince had come to Mayerling solely for the hunt. Leaving Mary upstairs with instructions to be as quiet as possible, Rudolf went down to meet his guest. "Ah, Joseph, old friend. Good to see you." Rudolf shook the Count's hand warmly. "Come in, make yourself comfortable. Truth be told, I'm afraid today's hunt will have to proceed without me. I'm not feeling quite myself this morning. A bit of a headache, you understand, after yesterday's journey, and the weather isn't exactly cheering." "Your Highness, what a misfortune," Hoyos said sympathetically, carefully observing the Crown Prince. "I hope it's nothing serious. Perhaps we should send for a doctor." "Nonsense, really." Rudolf waved him off with a light, disarming smile. "Just a slight chill, nothing serious. You go ahead and enjoy yourself for the both of us. The game here, as you know, is excellent." Count Hoyos, though somewhat surprised by the sudden indisposition of such an avid hunter as Rudolf, accepted his explanations without further questions, and wishing him a speedy recovery, soon set off to enjoy the hunting grounds alone. He was, of course, unaware of the Crown Prince's secret guest. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more about forgotten destinies and royal intrigues, subscribe. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. Rudolf, meanwhile, hurried back to Mary. They spent the rest of the day together, hardly ever leaving their chambers. She read him poetry, her voice trembling with happiness, recounted Viennese stories, and he listened, sometimes smiling. And in those hours, he seemed almost carefree, yielding to her radiant mood. For her, this time was one of sheer, almost unbelievable happiness. They spoke of love, of how difficult it was for them to meet in secret, of how wonderful it would be if they could be together openly. Sometimes I feel as if we're living in a gilded cage, Rudy, Mary said, looking dreamily out the window at the snow-covered silent forest. All these rules, conventions, prohibitions. But love, true love, it should be free like a bird. Yes, Rudolf agreed softly, almost in a whisper, and a faint bitterness could be heard in his voice. Free. He did not finish his thought, that for him this freedom had already taken on an entirely different, darker meaning. Freedom from everything, from rules, from pain, from life itself. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. She was full of plans and hopes that their seclusion in Mayerling was not just a secret rendezvous, but the beginning of something entirely new. She kept returning to the thought of escape, of a different life, where no one could interfere with them. Rudolf listened to her, and his heart ached with a mixture of tenderness for this naive, so devotedly loving girl, and a cold, inexorable determination to see his plan through. He looked at her radiant face, and thought, she believes so desperately in the future, and he already knew that they would have no future. By evening, Mary was utterly happy. The day, spent in the arms of her beloved, seemed to her the most beautiful of her life. She did not notice how intently Rudolf watched her, as if memorizing her every feature. She did not notice how he sometimes clenched his fists, struggling with inner pain. Rudolf, what if we just disappeared? She said dreamily. Ran far, far away where no one could find us. There we could truly be together. Yes, he whispered, and in his voice, besides tenderness, there was a kind of steely resolve. We will be together. Forever. Mary smiled broadly in response, not understanding the true meaning her beloved had put into those words. In the evening, Rudolf was to dine with Count Hoyos. The Crown Prince knew this was the last time he would play the role of a carefree aristocrat. After this dinner, the final act of the tragedy would begin. But to understand the abyss of despair that relentlessly drew Crown Prince Rudolf to the fatal brink in Mayerling, one must look deeper than just the story of his relationship with Mary Vetsera. Their secret, passionate affair, which had ignited in the brilliant but stifling atmosphere of Vienna, was for him merely the final, desperate chord in a symphony of unfulfilled hopes and profound disappointment. Mary, blinded by love, saw in him the hero of her dreams. Rudolf, on the other hand, jaded and empty, perhaps found in her unconditional adoration only a fleeting, bitter solace from the inner void that had been eating away at his soul for years. But the true roots of his despair ran deeper. Years of an unhappy dynastic marriage to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, devoid of warmth and understanding, had turned his family life into a formality. A severe, debilitating illness, likely syphilis, had tormented his body and mind since 1886, causing not only physical suffering, but also exacerbating bouts of deep depression, which he tried to numb with alcohol and morphine, sinking ever deeper into the abyss of self-destruction. It was against this grim backdrop that the decisive conflict with Emperor Franz Joseph erupted. Rumors of his all-consuming passion for Mary Vetsera and, even more audaciously, of his secret appeal to Pope Leo XIII to annul his marriage to Stephanie so he could marry Mary, reached the emperor's ears. A summons to the palace, to his father's stern, cold study where sentimentality never had a place, was inevitable and portended a storm. Rudolf! The emperor began without preamble, his voice as firm as steel, his gaze boding no good. Irrefutable proof of your insane behavior has reached me. This Baroness Vetsera, your unheard-of appeal to the Vatican. And this is in addition to your lifestyle, which has long cast a shadow over the entire family. Do you even understand what you have done? I demand that you immediately end this affair and withdraw your petition. Rudolf flared up. Years of suppressed anger, of feeling powerless, of resentment from paternal indifference, it all burst forth. Insane behavior? He scoffed bitterly. Father, for the first time in my life, I want to decide my own destiny. My marriage to Stephanie is a farce. You know that yourself. I love Mary. Silence. Franz Joseph cut him off, his fist slamming down on the table. Your duty is to be the heir to the throne, to continue the Habsburg line, not to indulge your base passions and destroy what has been built over centuries. Marrying some baroness, you've lost your mind. There will be no divorce. You will either immediately forget this girl and live up to your station, or I myself will take measures. And you will not like them. Do you understand me? The emperor's gaze was icy, leaving not the slightest hope for understanding or sympathy. Rudolf left his father's study, feeling as though the last hope was dying in his soul. The wall was impenetrable. He, the heir to a vast empire, was merely a prisoner of his station, his blood, his fate. This conversation became for him the point of no return, the final push into the abyss. He felt like a hunted animal, left with no escape. The world narrowed to the confines of a dark, stifling cage, from which, as it now became finally clear to him, there was only one way out. Death. Death as a release from physical and mental suffering, as a final act of defiance. It was with this unbearable burden of despair and hopelessness, with this firm, almost maniacal decision to end his life, that Crown Prince Rudolf was now in Mayerling, on his way to dinner with Count Hoyos. And in the next room, Mary awaited him, still cherishing fragile dreams, never suspecting the terrible role she was to play in this premeditated spectacle, where the curtain was to fall forever. On the evening of January 29th, when an impenetrable winter darkness had already enveloped Mayerling outside, and logs crackled merrily in the fireplace, Crown Prince Rudolf descended to dinner, where Count Joseph Hoyos, returned from the hunt, awaited him. If anyone could have peered into the heir's soul at that moment, they would have been horrified by the icy calm that reigned there, at the very bottom of despair. But outwardly, Rudolf was all charm and hospitality. "Well, Joseph, old friend, was the hunt successful?" He greeted his friend with a smile, pouring strong Hungarian wine into their glasses. "I hope you weren't too bored without my company?" Count Hoyos, pleased with his day and suspecting nothing, enthusiastically began to recount his hunting trophies. Rudolf listened with the liveliest interest, asked questions, told old anecdotes that made the Count laugh heartily, and discussed the latest Viennese news with his characteristic light cynicism. It seemed as though the dark shadows that had recently clouded the heir's brow had completely vanished. Count Hoyos, who left Mayerling late in the evening, departed fully convinced that the Crown Prince was in excellent spirits, and that his morning indisposition had been merely a fleeting whim. But as soon as the sound of the Count's departing carriage faded, and the heavy front door of the lodge closed with a dull thud, cutting Mayerling off from the outside world, the mask of gaiety and nonchalance instantly slipped from Rudolf's face. He paused for a moment in the hall, listening to the silence, then slowly, almost reluctantly, ascended the creaking staircase to his chambers, where Mary awaited him with impatience and a touch of anxiety. She met him at the door, her eyes shining with the joy of his return. "Well, at last, my dearest. I thought your Count would never leave. Are you all mine now?" But Rudolf remained motionless, his face pale and stern. "Mary," he began hoarsely, "we need to talk, seriously." Mary's heart sank. "About what, my dearest? Has something happened?" "What has happened is that our fairy tale has come to an end, or rather to the only ending possible for us." "I don't understand," she stammered. "Do you mean to leave me? Father, did he force you?" "Father," Rudolf repeated with contempt. "Him, too. But it's not just about him, Mary. It's about the fact that there is no place for us in this world, no future. They will never leave us in peace. They will separate us, disgrace us. But there is one way out, Mary." His voice became quiet, almost hypnotic. "One way to stay together forever. There, where no one can disturb us." Mary stared at him, her eyes wide with terror. What do you mean, Rudy?" "I mean death, Mary," he said distinctly. "A shared death. Here. Only thus will we find peace and eternal union." Mary's world collapsed. She recoiled, covering her face with her hands. "Rudy, what are you saying? This is madness. We must find another way. We can run away. Go far, far away," she pleaded. Run away? Rudolf laughed bitterly. He approached her, took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eyes. His gaze was full of desperate resolve. Where would we run, Mary? From my father? From the entire empire? From ourselves? They will find us, bring us back, separate us. You will be sent to a convent, and a fate worse than death awaits me. A life of lies, humiliation, without you. Is that what you want? No, but death. It's so frightening, Rudy. Her voice trembled, and tears streamed down her cheeks. More frightening than a life apart? More frightening than seeing our love trampled? He spoke insistently, his fingers gripping her shoulders tighter. Think, Mary, this world is not for us. It is too cruel, too deceitful. But there is another world, where we will be together, where no one will dare to judge us, where our love will be free and eternal. Isn't that beautiful? He spoke of death as if it were a desired release, a passage to a better dimension. His words, full of despair and a kind of perverse romanticism, penetrated her bewildered mind. But how? It's a sin, Rudy, she whispered, instinctively clinging to the last vestiges of common sense. It is a sin to live a lie, Mary. It is a sin to betray our love. His voice became firm again. But to depart together, keeping our love pure and unstained, that is not a sin. It is the highest expression of devotion. Understand, I cannot take this step without you. My heart will not bear it if I know you are left here, alone, unhappy, only together, only if you give your consent. He looked at her with such entreaty and hopelessness in his eyes that her heart tore with pain and pity. Her own fear of death began to yield to another, even stronger fear, the fear of losing him, of leaving him alone in his terrible despair. The thought of life without him seemed unbearable, more frightening than death itself. Her romantic, exalted consciousness, reinforced by the plots of her beloved novels, where heroes unable to unite on Earth found eternal happiness in a shared death, began to work in the right direction for him. She remembered lines from some tragedy. Love is stronger than death. And in his proposal, so monstrous at first, she began to see not madness, but a certain supreme tragic beauty, the only worthy finale for their great love. She even began to see in this her special mission, not to leave him alone in his mortal anguish, to become his redeeming angel, the one who would share his last, most terrible path. Tears still flowed down her cheeks, but in her eyes, the initial terror was gone. A kind of fatal, almost mystical resolve had appeared in them. She slowly approached him, took his cold hands in hers, and looking him straight in the eyes, quietly but firmly said, "Yes, my Rudy, I agree. If we cannot be together in this life, we will be together in another, forever." A silence, heavy and thick as pre-dawn fog, enveloped the room in Mayerling. Outside, the January blizzard howled, its moans mingling with the dull thuds of the hearts within. The decision, terrible and irrevocable, had been made. Rudolf, his face gaunt and pale, but with a feverish, almost unnatural energy, moved a small writing desk closer to the fireplace. He took out an elegant traveling case with writing implements, crested paper, an inkwell, quills. It all looked strangely mundane against the backdrop of the drama unfolding in their souls. "We need to write letters, Mary." His voice was even, almost dispassionate, as if he were speaking of some routine chore. "To explain, as much as possible." Mary nodded silently. In her large, frightened eyes, a mixture of despair, fatalistic resignation, and a strange, almost mystical submission to fate was frozen. This was no longer the enthusiastic, chattering girl who had dreamed of a cottage in Italy that morning. This was a woman standing on the edge of an abyss, tightly clutching the hand of the one leading her into it. They sat at the table opposite each other. The scratching of quills broke the oppressive silence. Rudolf wrote quickly, almost without thinking, his hand steadily forming lines addressed to his wife, his mother, a few close friends. There was no remorse in these letters, only bitter regret for unfulfilled hopes, for a broken life, and a desperate attempt to justify his final fatal step. He wrote of honor, of the impossibility of living a lie, of death being the only release. Mary, however, wrote slowly, her hand trembling, pausing frequently. Each word came with difficulty. She addressed her mother, her sisters, trying to explain the unexplainable. "Forgive me for everything," she scrawled in an unsteady hand, "but I could not resist love. I am going to him, because without him my life has no meaning. I am happier in death than in life, because there we will be together forever." Time passed. The flames in the fireplace died down, casting ever longer, more bizarre shadows on their pale faces. Finally, the letters were written. Rudolf carefully folded his messages, sealing them with wax and his signet ring. Mary, watching him, did the same with her letters. Outside, the January blizzard still howled as if mourning their still living souls. Ahead, only a few short, drawn-out hours until a dawn they would not see. The remaining hours of the night dragged by agonizingly, each minute counting down to the inevitable. They hardly spoke. Words seemed unnecessary, powerless in the face of what lay before them. Mary sat huddled close to Rudolf, her head resting on his shoulder. He silently stroked her loosened hair, his hand heavy as lead, his eyes fixed with a detached, frightening emptiness. Dawn approached, gray, cold shadows slowly, inexorably creeping into the room. Rudolf took a deep breath, as if gathering his last strength. He gently moved Mary away to look into her eyes. In her wide pupils, despite the fear frozen within them, and boundless, almost childlike love and absolute devotion still shone. "Mary!" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "It's not too late to change your mind. Are you sure? Do you truly agree? I will understand if—" He gave her this last, ghostly chance to step back from the edge of the abyss. But Mary only shook her head resolutely, and a faint but firm smile appeared on her pale lips. She had already crossed the line beyond which the fear of death gave way to a desperate resolve to be with him, to share his fate, however terrible it might be. "No, my Rudy," she answered quietly, but her voice did not tremble. "I have not changed my mind, and I will not retreat. If this is the only way to ease your pain, if this is the only way for us to be together, I am ready. I love you. And without you, I too cannot exist. My life only has meaning beside you, wherever that may be." Her words finally dispelled his last hesitations, if any remained. He gripped her hand tightly. "Then, it is time," he whispered, his voice filled with a dull, all-consuming weariness. He leaned down and kissed her cold, slightly trembling lips, a long farewell kiss in which tenderness, bitterness, and terrible resolve mingled. Then he pulled away. For a moment, an absolute ringing silence reigned in the room, broken only by their ragged breathing. And in that silence, tearing through the pre-dawn gloom, the first shot rang out. When the smoke cleared, Mary Vetsera lay lifeless on the chaise lounge, her dark hair fanned out on the pillow. Rudolf, his face contorted with unspeakable anguish, stared at her for several long, endless seconds. Then, as if in a dream, he walked to a small table where, among other things, lay a single dark red rose. He picked up the flower, so fragile and beautiful against the surrounding gloom, and returned to her. Gently, almost reverently, he placed the rose in her already cooling hands, folded on her breast. This gesture, full of a perverse, tragic tenderness, was his final farewell, the last symbol of their doomed love. After that, he straightened, his movements slow, almost mechanical. He picked up the heavy army revolver again. For a moment his gaze flickered to the window, where the cold, gray dawn of a new day was already breaking, a day he would not see. Then he resolutely brought the muzzle to his temple. Their dance with death concluded in the icy silence of the hunting lodge. 2 young lives, cut short so tragically, so prematurely. 2 souls who had sought happiness and freedom, but found only eternal rest in each other's embrace at the very edge of the abyss. Silence. A thick, dead silence, broken only by the faint crackling of dying embers in the fireplace, and the quiet, almost inaudible fall of a petal from that rose onto the cold floor. The morning brought not the dawn of a new life, but a horrifying discovery that would shake the empire to its foundations and give birth to a mystery that lives on to this day. The discovery of the lifeless bodies of Crown Prince Rudolf and Mary Vetsera at Mayerling sent a shockwave through the court, quickly followed by panic. The primary task became to conceal the truth. The first official version was that Rudolf had died of a heart rupture. Mary Vetsera's name was not mentioned at all. It was as if they were trying to erase her from history. However, rumors could not be stopped. When the medical examination indicated gunshot wounds, the version changed to suicide in a state of mental derangement. Mary, meanwhile, was portrayed sometimes as an unfortunate victim, sometimes even as the instigator of the tragedy. Particularly cynical was her hasty, almost secret burial, contrasting sharply with the state funeral of the Crown Prince, who, despite committing suicide, was interred in the imperial crypt. The system was saving its reputation, sacrificing the memory of those who proved weaker. But the secret of Mayerling could not be buried along with its victims. It lived on, stirring minds. If you enjoy experiencing history through storytelling, make sure to subscribe. Many more fascinating tales await. This story is inspired by real events but includes elements of artistic fiction. Up next, you will see a list of historical facts that formed its foundation.